Surprise, surprise, Mohammad Hijab has actually responded to the Islamic Dilemma. He recently dropped a video going after Wes Huff because, he's all about that aura farming. I didn't have time to put together a fully edited breakdown for this one, so I hope you guys don't mind me just narrating it out raw. Let's walk through his response and see if the Islamic Dilemma is finished.
You're finished. Wallahi, you're finished.
That he mentions in chapter number 5, verse number 47, that Allah mentions that basically, you've got to rule by the Torah, right, and so on. And then it says, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ, and whoever does not rule by what Allah has revealed, then they are the disbelievers. I mean, all it takes is for him to have read the next verse, which says that وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ بِالْحَقِّ مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ وَمُهَيْمِنًا عَلَيْهِ. Okay, now this is a very important phrase because actually muhaymin, this terminology, is used to describe Allah. So what does the verse mean? It says, and we have sent down the book, i.e. the Qur'an now. Yep. Okay, we have sent down the Qur'an to you in truth to affirm that which has come before it. And we'll explain what that means in a second, or in that which will follow. وَمُهَيْمِنًا عَلَيْهِ, and a guardian over it. Muhaymin is a guardian. In this context, there's nothing this word can mean except that it's a distinguisher from what is true and what is false. And that is what the mufassirs or the exegetes of old and in the contemporary period have all understood the word to mean.
This objection completely collapses under scrutiny. First, appealing to Muhammad as guardian doesn't solve much of anything. It actually makes the problem worse. If the Quran is supposed to guard the earlier scriptures, then why does it show up 600 years too late? Guardians preserve what they watch over. They don't let it get corrupted for centuries, then show up and say, don't worry, I'll fix it now. That's not guardianship. That's replacement. It's like hiring a security guard for a museum, but he shows up centuries late after all the artifacts have already been stolen and swapped out. Then he walks in, points at a few remaining pieces and says, I approve of these, the rest, fake. That's not a guardian, that's a critic with a badge. He didn't protect anything. He just walked in after the fact and claimed the right to rewrite the catalog. If the Quran is a guardian like that, it's not guarding, it's gatekeeping. And that only proves the dilemma. The Quran replaces the previous scripture while pretending to confirm it. Second, the idea that the Quran is filtering earlier revelation directly contradicts 547, which commands Christians to judge by what Allah has revealed in the gospel, not by what used to be in it, not by parts that match the Quran, but the Injil itself. That only makes sense if the Injil is still intact. And the verse doesn't say judge by the preserved parts because no one knows what those are. You can't have it both ways. If the gospel is corrupted, then Allah made a huge mistake telling Christians to follow it. And if it's not corrupted, then the Quran is false because it contradicts the gospel constantly. That's the Islamic dilemma, and no amount of doing mental gymnastics with the word Muhammad is going to get you out of it.
Meaning what? That from the corrupted versions of the Bible, from the corrupted versions of, and we don't even believe in the Bible. And the Quran does not mention the word Biblios or Bible, which means book in the Greek language. It's not something that's mentioned in the Quran. But say for the sake of argument, the corrupted version of the Torah, the corrupted version of the Injil, which don't even exist because there was no one gospel of Jesus anywhere. There's only the Gospels according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and so on and so forth. Yep. But we'll continue and say, how do you explain, the question would go, how would you explain the fact that the Quran mentions, for example, in chapter number 3, verse number 187, for instance, and there are many verses like it, but I'm just choosing this one for now, because this verse is clear about Christians and Jews, the books of the Christians and the books of the Jews. فَنَبَذُوهُ وَرَاءَ ظُهُورِهِمْ, that they have thrown it behind their backs, and it's obviously a figure of speech. But if you look at what At-Tabari mentions about this verse, it means ضَيَّعُوهُ, they have lost it. They have lost the books. They have not been able to preserve the books. That's what it means.
This objection actually proves the Islamic dilemma rather than refutes it. Yes, the Quran doesn't use the word Bible. It talks about the Torah and the Injil. But that just raises the real problem. The Quran says Allah gave the Injil to Jesus. Let's call that Injil J. Then, centuries later, it tells Christians in Muhammad's time to judge by what Allah revealed in the Injil, call that Injil M. But here's the thing, there was no separate book called Injil floating around in 7th century Arabia. What Christians had, and still have, are the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So if that's not the Injil, then what is? You can't just say, those aren't the Injil and walk away. The Quran commands Christians to judge by something they're supposed to have. If that thing doesn't exist, then the Quran is wrong. If the Gospels are what's meant, the Quran is still wrong because they contradict it at every turn. As for Quran 3187, they threw the book behind their backs, that's not proof of textual corruption, it's a figure of speech. It means neglect or disobedience, not that the scrolls were rewritten or the books were lost. The Quran repeatedly critiques how the people of the book handled revelation, not that they physically edited out Allah's words. Now, here's where things get worse for the Muslim view. They'll say, well, the Injil was partly preserved and partly corrupted, but that creates a massive theological problem. Imagine I write a book. I copy and paste parts of the Quran. Then I add a bunch of stuff I made up. It's a mix. Some part is preserved revelation, some human invention, and no clear line between them. Would Allah call that the Quran? No, of course not. That would be blasphemy, shirk. Allah's words mixed with mine, that book would be condemned. Anyone reading it would be warned to throw it out and go read the real Quran. Now, apply that same logic to the Injil. Muslims claim that it was originally Allah's pure revelation to Jesus, but by Muhammad's time, it had been corrupted and mixed with human invention. So why does the Quran call it the Injil with no qualifiers? Why does Allah command Christians to judge by it in Surah 547? Why doesn't he warn them that it's been tampered with? Instead, in Surah 546, he calls it guidance and light, not was, is. And then in 566 through 68, he goes even further and says that the people of the book have nothing to stand on unless they uphold the Torah, the Injil, and what was revealed to them from their Lord. That's not a warning, it's an endorsement. The Quran is flat out telling Jews and Christians to rely on texts that, according to Muslims, were supposedly corrupted. That's not divine clarity, that's divine confusion. Muslims today make a clean distinction between the original Injil and the corrupted text, but the Quran doesn't. It uses the same word for both. It never tells you which is which. It never says, don't read this version, or that's a forgery. So Allah is completely unclear. So here's the conclusion. Either Allah wasn't aware that the Injil had been corrupted, or he failed to adequately warn anyone about it. Both options make the Quran self-defeating.
On the other point that he made, where he mentions in Surah Yunus, that it mentions that فَاسْأَلَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ, that go and ask the people who have been given the book before you. Yeah, go and ask the people. You know, it's very interesting because Sa'id ibn Jubair, he mentions, according to At-Tabari, and I've checked the chain of narration, it's an authentic chain of narration. Very interesting how he addressed this verse. Because the verse starts, if you are in any doubt from that which has been revealed to you, then go and ask the people of the book that came before you. That's what the verse says, yeah? فَاسْأَلَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ. But I'm sure this man is clever enough to understand that this is a conditional. A conditional if you are in doubt. So what Sa'id ibn Jubair mentions, one of the Salaf, the early people, and that's mentioned at Tabari's tafsir, مَا شَكَّ وَمَا سَأَلَ. He didn't doubt and he didn't ask. Do you see? If you were in doubt, go and ask. But he wasn't in doubt, so he did not ask. So it's irrelevant.
This whole it's conditional, so it's rhetorical line is just damage control. Let's be real, if Muhammad was never in doubt, then why is Allah even issuing the command in Surah 1094, if you're in doubt, ask the people of the book? Why include that unless it actually matters? Is Allah just throwing in hypotheticals for dramatic flair? That's not how divine revelation works, especially not in a book that claims to be clear, decisive, and free from contradictions. You don't get to pretend that a direct command from Allah is meaningless. If the scenario is irrelevant, then the verse is confusing. And if it's relevant, then the scriptures Christians and Jews had in the 7th century must have been reliable, which shatters the whole corrupted Injil narrative. Either way, the Quran loses. And it gets worse because, as Mohammad Hijab is aware, the command is unworkable. If Muhammad did ask the people of the book, what would he find? Scripture saying that Jesus is the Son of God, that he died on a cross, that he claimed divine authority. All the things that the Quran denies. So now what? If those scriptures are preserved, Muhammad is a false prophet. If they're corrupted, then the Quran is absurd for telling him to consult them. And if no one knows which parts are true and which parts are fake, then the command is pointless. And no, you can't just say compare it to the Quran to know what's true. The whole point of this verse is that Muhammad is supposed to test the Quran using the earlier scriptures, not the other way around. So yes, this verse is a massive problem. It creates a contradiction, and no amount of hand-waving from scholars changes that. Bottom line, the Islamic dilemma is still standing, and it's not going anywhere.